Hello and welcome back everyone to Master Blender 3D with Wild West Environment. In the last lesson, we left ourselves off with some nice seams going across the setup. We're going to learn how to make use out of them. And now we're going to go ahead and get ourselves the materials needed for the setup. So firstly, I'm going to scroll my mouse wheel to see in the top bar over here. As you can see, I'm scrolling through it to see that we need to enable viewport shading materials. That way we can actually see what materials we are applying. We're going to now go open ourselves up onto the resource pack that we have. And realistically, we only need stylized dark iron and stylized dark. So I think stylized. So these two essentially. I'm just going to double check the material name. So yeah, stylized iron and stylized dark. Yeah. The thing though is that we can just grab these two and move them across using Control-C, Control-V from one project to another. Or alternatively, we could just grab this entire section and just move it so we won't have to waste our time going back and forth in the future. I think that's exactly what we're going to do with this particular case. We're going to go ahead and just grab this entire piece, going to hit Control-C, make a copy. It says 121 items copied. And I'm going to go onto this piece over here. Going to hit Control-V, paste it in, wait a little bit because it is going to take some time. And I'm going to move all of them off to the side. So I'm going to click, going to do GX50. There we go. We move them all quite a bit to the side so it gets out of our way. Now, I do not recommend you doing this perhaps if you have a slower computer. You can just select these two and do them one by one whilst we're working. But my personal preference is just to grab everything that we have and just move it on to the scene. That way we're able to work with them all at once. So next step is going to be just applying the material. We're going to go onto the material tab. We're going to hit new and we're going to find ourselves the iron that we were talking about, stylized iron. There we go. We're going to apply it right away. We're going to see that, hey, this is looking quite bad at this point. What is going on? Well, for starters, we're going to need to UV unwrap. I'm going to go ahead and click Control S because I haven't done that. And I'm going to make sure that external, I will go ahead and enable external data. This doesn't really matter unless you want to move a project from one computer to another, but it's just a personal preference that I do. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the UVs. So we're going to hit tab, and the easiest thing that we can do is just click A. So the entire section is selected. You can see that if we don't have the item selected, nothing is going to be shown. If we want to, we can use UV sync selection. So this is going to be, when enabled, it's going to show everything within our UVs that is within the edit mode. And that's, for me personally, that's pretty useful because that way I can just, for example, select parts of the mesh and I can see where exactly on the selection it is. So honestly, 80% of the time I will be working with UV sync selection personally. That's just honestly just a personal preference. Then the next thing is going to be just starting the unwrap process. And because we already placed all of the seams, the easiest thing for us to do is just click A, click U and unwrap. We have multiple options. There is projection based at the bottom, like middle and the bottom. But the ones that we're looking for is going to be the three at the top. Angle based, conformal, and minimum stretch. Conformal is the usual UV unwrap that we see before. Personally though, minimum stretch is a new algorithm and I really like this one because it just gives so much better results in terms of the way it stretches out the angles and whatnot. It's mainly for organic looking meshes though. And angle based is if we want to, how should I put it? If we want to base the unwrapping based on more of an angles, if we have more extreme angle values on certain parts, we might want to use that. But honestly, again, minimum stretch is the way I usually go for. And once we click on it with everything selected, we're going to see this setup. So what is going on right here? Well, for starters, we have the top, the bottom, because it's been separated by the seams. We also have all of these parts separate as well. I can make use out of selection. Clicking L will give me select based on linked. If we click on this tab over here, we can select use select linked based on seams. That is what I'm using right now. So these red lines again are called seams, and we are limiting selection based on that. So there we go. If we click L, for example, over here, we see that the entire selection is still being selected, even though there is a line over here, because it goes all the way around. And the only limiter is these horizontal edge lines over here at the top and the bottom. So yeah, because of that, we're able to see how the islands are, and we have multiple selections for that. So all of it is pretty good. The thing I mentioned before is these parts over here, the bolts. So they get projected basically from the front and unwrapped. And the parts on the edge are going to be just flattened out to give you the best density possible out of these, which for the shape in particular is totally okay to have it like this. So now that we have this set up, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about how seamless textures work. Right now we have this seamless textures like this. And you might be wondering if it's okay, if it's not, to have this amount of density. And honestly, because of the way this texture is set up, it is a seamless texture, meaning that like wherever this texture ends, which in terms of texturing, it is 0 to 1 space. This square over here is just 0 to 1 space. Whenever it ends, it's going to seamlessly loop that texture. So if I was to put this UV over here, you wouldn't be able to see the difference in this seam over here. The reason being, again, because it loops seamlessly. So that's quite nice. And yeah, I was worried for a second that like, hey, there is a line over here. Is that a seam? No, that's not actually a seam. Seam is going to be over here, which is not going to be visible. This over here is just part of the texture. So it's just a scratch, as in other words, part of the texture. So that scared me for a second. All right, everything is okay. The other thing I'd like to talk about is, other than seamless textures, meaning that we could technically just grab this entire thing and just scale it up to control the density. Before doing that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the way these are stretched out. For example, we do have them being weirdly confronted. They are not perfectly straight. You might be worried about them not being straight, but that's totally okay, especially for this particular case where the noise of a texture is consistent, going up and down. There's no direction or anything like in the wood grain. So we don't really need to worry about that. In the future lessons, I will show you how to approach that, especially with wagon wheels and whatnot. But again, this particular case, it does not matter. It's totally okay to leave it as is. The other thing I'd like to talk about though, to make our lives easier, is going to be the setup of averaging out the UV density. So in this case, if we make this, for example, much smaller, we could see like a big difference between those two materials, between those two parts. And the way to fix it is to just grab everything, go to UVs and average island scale. This will just average everything out in terms of the size, which is going to make the texture more consistent throughout the setup. Afterwards, we can worry about the placement. We can put them back in between the 0 to 1 UV space, which we can make use out of something called pack islands. So pack islands, if you'll notice, automatically does scale and rotate. Scaling is relevant to the already existing UVs. So for example, if one part is much larger in terms of density, it's going to scale everything, but leave that larger part to have more extra UV space. So that's why it's important to average out the island scale and maybe do a little bit of extra adjustment before doing pack islands, because as an example, you see that this part now is much larger. So again, average out the island scale is done first and pack islands is done after. The next thing is going to be within pack islands. What is it? How does it work? Well, pack islands just, again, puts it into 0 to 1 space, and we have a couple of shape methods. I use usually just the normal one as is. Scale, rotate, I keep them on because the scaling is going to, it's going to be needed to be done to fit everything into 0 to 1 space. Rotation, we have control over how we're going to rotate. Rotation method, I personally prefer to just keep it as axis aligned vertical. It means that every single one in terms of length is going to be positioned vertically. So it's going to rotate us according to that. And for something like this metal, it might not be quite as visible, but for other materials, it's definitely needed. So in general, I just tend to keep this as the default. Scale margin method, we can just leave it as is, but the margin itself is going to be affecting how close the UVs is one to another. If you keep this as 0, it's going to be just touching the edges, and that's not something that we want, because the reason being is when you think about texture density, you might think that the pixels, for example, might bleed out onto one another, but the main reason is that, for example, in game engines, they use texture optimization. They got bitmaps and whatnot that essentially work as LODs, if you know what LODs are with meshes. So they lower the resolution of the texture based on how close or how far you are from an object. So if you're further away, it's going to look like it has less resolution. And then it starts to real bleed out issues. So always try to make use out of the margin when you can. A good default value is 0.03. And if we click pack, we'll notice that even though it's not as visible, once we start zooming in, we see that there is exactly that gap that we were talking about. So it's a tiny gap. It's not going to lose a lot of density over it, but it's really useful to have that margin spacing. Otherwise, again, it's going to bleed out meshes with one another. If you're doing something like sci-fi where it has like emission, texture and whatnot onto the same mesh, then it's especially going to be visible. So really try to have that margin spacing in between the UVs. Okay, so we got ourselves the UV setups. Now what? Well, we're going to continue on with splitting up materials into multiple pieces. We have multiple pieces in here, so we need to figure out how we're going to do that. But for that, we're going to do it all in the next lesson. Thank you so much for watching, and I will be seeing you in a bit.